Picture this scene. 300 poorly armed men, hungry and vastly outnumbered, standing face to face with an army 3 times larger, well-equipped and determined to crush them completely. This was the Battle of Badr, a conflict that not only defined the future of Islam, but one that Muslims believe was won with divine assistance. How did a small group of believers defeat such an overwhelming force? The answer might forever change how you view this pivotal moment in history. The year was 624 after Christ. Muhammad and his followers, recently expelled from Mecca by the Quraysh, the dominant tribe, had taken refuge in Medina, struggling daily just to survive. When they received intelligence that a caravan of enemy merchants laden with riches would be passing through Badr, they saw an opportunity and decided to attack. But what was intended to be a simple raid on a caravan transformed into an epic battle where the very destiny of Islam would be decided. The odds seemed impossible. On one side stood Muhammad's 313 followers, many without proper armor, wielding makeshift weapons, their stomachs empty but their hearts full of faith. Opposing them were nearly 1,000 Quraysh warriors, the elite fighting force of Arabia, armored in fine mail, bearing polished swords, and confident in their overwhelming advantage. What happened next would shake the foundations of power throughout Arabia. Against all military logic, against all expectations, the smaller force emerged victorious. For Muslims, this outcome could only be explained through divine intervention, the hand of God guiding their swords, strengthening their resolve, and sending unseen angels to fight alongside them. This wasn't merely a battle over a caravan or territorial dispute. This was the moment when a fledgling religion faced extinction and somehow found the strength not only to survive, but to triumph. The Battle of Badr represents one of history's most astonishing military upsets, a David versus Goliath story, where faith collided with force, and against all odds, faith prevailed. The consequences of this single day of fighting would echo through centuries. Had the outcome been different, had the Quraysh crushed Muhammad and his followers as expected, Islam might never have spread beyond a small corner of Arabia. The course of world history would have been forever altered. Instead, this victory gave the early Muslims the legitimacy and confidence they needed to grow from a persecuted minority into what would eventually become one of the world's great civilizations. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we journey through time to discover how a single battle in a remote desert changed the world forever. To understand the Battle of Badr, we need to dive into one of history's most consequential rivalries, the bitter conflict between Mecca and Medina. The Quraysh of Mecca weren't just any tribe. They were the undisputed masters of Arabia. For generations, they controlled the lucrative trade routes that connected Yemen to Syria and beyond. More importantly, they were the custodians of the Kaaba, the sacred shrine housing hundreds of idols worshipped by Arab tribes. This religious authority translated into immense wealth and power as pilgrims flocked to Mecca year after year. Then came Muhammad with a revolutionary message that shook their very foundations. Imagine the scene. A man from their own tribe standing in the markets and streets of Mecca, denouncing their gods as false idols and preaching about one invisible God. For the Quraysh, this wasn't just religious disagreement. It was an existential threat to their entire economic and social order. The persecution began slowly at first, mockery, social boycotts, and economic pressure. But as Muhammad's message gained followers, the Quraysh's methods grew increasingly brutal. Early Muslims were tortured, starved, and even killed. Muhammad himself narrowly escaped several assassination attempts. Eventually, in the year 622 after Christ, Muhammad and his followers made the fateful decision to flee Mecca for Medina, a city over 200 miles to the north where he had been offered protection. This migration, known as the Hijra, marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. That's how significant it was. But escaping to Medina didn't end the conflict, it transformed it. The Muslims left behind their homes, their businesses, and their possessions, which the Quraysh promptly seized. In Medina, the refugee community struggled to rebuild their lives from nothing. Meanwhile, the Quraysh weren't content to let Muhammad establish a rival power center. They sent threatening letters to their allies in the region, organized economic blockades, and plotted military action against the fledgling Muslim community. This brings us to the immediate cause of the Battle of Badr. Intelligence reached Muhammad that a massive Quraysh caravan, led by none other than Abu Sufyan, one of Mecca's most powerful leaders, would be passing near Medina on its return journey from Syria. This wasn't just any caravan. It contained the accumulated wealth of many Meccan merchants, including property that had been confiscated from the Muslims themselves. For the struggling refugees in Medina, intercepting this caravan represented both economic survival and a chance for justice. But Abu Sufyan was cunning. Upon hearing rumors of a potential ambush, he sent an urgent message to Mecca requesting military support and diverted the caravan to a safer coastal route. The Quraysh response was immediate and overwhelming. Rather than simply sending reinforcements to protect the caravan, they mobilized a full-scale army, nearly 1,000 strong, with the stated intention of crushing the Muslim community once and for all. What began as a plan to intercept a caravan had suddenly escalated into an existential showdown. When Muhammad learned that an army was coming instead of a caravan, he gathered his companions and asked for their counsel. Would they face this overwhelming force or retreat to safety? The decision they made would change history forever. Here's something fascinating most people don't know. Before the battle began, Muhammad performed a gesture that his followers interpreted as both symbolic and miraculous. Standing before the assembled Quraysh army, he took a handful of desert sand, threw it toward the enemy lines, and proclaimed, "May their faces be distorted." According to Islamic tradition, a sudden wind carried these particles of sand into the eyes of the Quraysh warriors, causing confusion and disarray in their ranks. Muslims believe this simple act, a handful of sand against an army, demonstrated divine favor and foreshadowed the improbable victory to come. The stage was set. Two forces of dramatically unequal strength faced each other across the plains of Badr, one fighting to preserve their dominance, the other fighting for their very survival. What happened next would send shockwaves throughout Arabia and set the course for a new world order. When the dust settled on the morning of the battle, the stark reality of the situation became painfully clear. Muhammad had managed to gather just 313 men to face the approaching Quraysh force. Think about that number for a moment. 313 individuals standing against the might of Mecca's finest warriors. It wasn't just their small number that made victory seem impossible. It was their complete lack of military preparation. This wasn't a professional army by any stretch of the imagination. Among Muhammad's followers were young boys barely old enough to hold a sword, elderly men whose fighting days should have been long behind them, and former slaves with no combat training whatsoever. Many had no armor to protect them from enemy blades. Some carried only wooden staves or hunting bows instead of proper weapons. A few fortunate ones possessed swords, but even these were often of poor quality, inherited family heirlooms or hastily forged blades. Their transportation situation was equally dire. The Muslim force had only 2 horses and 70 camels between them, meaning most would fight on foot. They took turns riding the camels on the march to Badr, 3 or 4 men sharing a single animal. Now contrast this ragtag group with what awaited them on the battlefield. The Quraysh had assembled a force of around 1,000 elite warriors, the flower of Meccan nobility, and their allies. These weren't just fighters. They were professional soldiers equipped with the finest weapons money could buy. Their armor gleamed in the desert sun, polished shields and helmets offering substantial protection. Their heavy cavalry, mounted on well-bred horses, was trained to charge en masse, breaking enemy formations through sheer momentum and terror. The Quraysh brought not just superior numbers and equipment, but also psychological advantage. Many of their warriors had been fighting desert skirmishes their entire lives. Their commanders included veterans of countless battles, men whose very names struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. The Quraysh were so confident in their overwhelming advantage that they brought singing girls with drums to celebrate their anticipated victory, and enough food and wine for 3 days of post-battle feasting. By any rational military assessment, the battle was decided before it began. The Muslims were outnumbered more than 3-1, grossly under-equipped, and facing fighters with vastly more experience. No outside observer would have given Muhammad's forces even the slightest chance of survival, let alone victory. But Muhammad possessed something his enemies couldn't quantify or counter: absolute conviction. While the Quraysh fought for pride and to maintain their commercial dominance, Muhammad's followers believed they were fighting for their very existence and in defense of divine truth. This wasn't just another tribal skirmish. For the Muslims, this was an existential struggle between truth and falsehood. A fascinating detail from historical accounts reveals Muhammad's mindset before the battle. When surveying the Quraysh forces from a hilltop, one of his companions expressed fear at the overwhelming odds. Muhammad responded not with bravado or empty promises, but by falling to his knees in fervent prayer. According to witnesses, he raised his hands toward heaven and implored, "O God, if this small band perishes today, you will no longer be worshipped on earth." This wasn't theatrical performance. It was the genuine plea of a man who believed the future of his faith hung in the balance. And what truly sets this battle apart in Islamic tradition is what Muslims believe happened next. The Quran itself, in Surah Al-Anfal, states that God responded to Muhammad's prayers by sending an invisible army of angels to fight alongside the believers. "I will help you with 1,000 angels, rank upon rank," the verse declares. For Muslims throughout history, this divine intervention explains how such an improbable victory was achieved. Whether you attribute the outcome to divine intervention, superior strategy, or the extraordinary motivation of fighters who believed they were engaged in a sacred struggle, what's undeniable is that Muhammad's unlikely army was about to accomplish what should have been impossible. The stage was set for one of history's most remarkable military upsets, a victory that would change the balance of power in Arabia forever. What Muhammad lacked in numbers and equipment, he made up for with brilliant tactical thinking. While his enemies saw only a religious leader, they failed to recognize the military genius standing before them. And this oversight would cost them dearly. As the Quraysh army approached Badr, they expected to find Muhammad's forces positioned according to traditional Arab battle customs, out in the open plains where cavalry could maneuver freely. Instead, Muhammad completely upended convention. He chose to position his small force near the foothills of a valley, with the hills protecting one flank and rough terrain limiting the effectiveness of the enemy's superior cavalry. But his most brilliant move came when he identified the water sources in the area. There were several wells at Badr, and Muhammad made sure his forces reached them first. His men quickly filled every available container with water, and then, in a decision that shocked even some of his own followers, he ordered the wells blocked or controlled. When the Quraysh arrived, exhausted from their march through the desert, they found themselves cut off from water supplies. Can you imagine the psychological impact? 1,000 men and their horses, in the scorching Arabian heat, suddenly realizing they would have to fight while parched with thirst. This wasn't just about physical discomfort. It forced the Quraysh into making a critical decision: either retreat without water, potentially losing warriors to dehydration on the journey back, or attack immediately while thirsty and fatigued. Their pride made the choice for them. They would attack. Muhammad's preparation went beyond just terrain and resources. Unlike the disorganized fighting style common in tribal warfare, he arranged his men in disciplined ranks, something rarely seen in Arabia at that time. He personally walked the battle line, positioning each fighter precisely where he wanted them, creating a unified formation rather than the usual individual combats. Another fascinating detail often overlooked is how Muhammad altered traditional battle engagement. Arab warfare typically began with individual champions from each side, engaging in single combat. Muhammad strategically selected younger, less-known fighters as his champions, a move that infuriated the Quraysh nobility, who expected to face opponents of equal social standing. When these young Muslim fighters quickly dispatched their prestigious opponents, it sent shockwaves through the Quraysh ranks before the main battle even began. But perhaps what truly turned the tide came during the height of battle. Historical accounts describe how the weather itself seemed to intervene. A sudden, fierce sandstorm blew directly into the faces of the Quraysh warriors. blinding them temporarily while the Muslims, with their backs to the storm, could see clearly. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, just as the main forces clashed. For secular historians, this was a fortunate meteorological event that Muhammad brilliantly exploited. But for Muslims, this was something far more significant. The Quran explicitly states in Surah Al-Anfal verse 9, "God helped you with 1,000 angels, rank upon rank." In Islamic tradition, those swirling sands weren't just a fortunate windstorm. They were the wings of angels descending to battle. Many Muslim warriors later testified that during the fighting, they witnessed mysterious fighters in white turbans appearing suddenly on the battlefield, striking down enemies before vanishing. Others described hearing unknown voices and seeing enemies fall without apparent cause. These accounts, passed down through generations, formed the bedrock of belief that divine intervention played a crucial role in the battle's outcome. Was it military genius or divine miracle? Perhaps it was both. What's undeniable is that Muhammad's forces, against overwhelming odds, achieved what should have been impossible. By the battle's end, approximately 70 Quraysh lay dead, including many of their most important leaders, with a similar number taken prisoner. The Muslims, astonishingly, lost only 14 men. The psychological impact was immense. Word spread rapidly throughout Arabia that the small Muslim community had defeated Mecca's finest warriors. Tribes that had been hesitant to ally with Muhammad now reconsidered their position. The balance of power had shifted dramatically in a single day. Did you know that Muslims believe angels fought at Badr? If you're enjoying this video, like it, share it, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more incredible stories. And tell us in the comments, do you think the victory was strategy or miracle? To truly understand the Battle of Badr's significance, we need to look beyond the clash of swords and spears to its profound and lasting impact on history. Badr was far more than just a military victory. It was the moment when Islam transformed from a persecuted faith into a rising power that would eventually reshape the world. Before Badr, the Muslims were seen as little more than a troublesome religious sect, refugees who had fled their homes with few possessions and little hope. After Badr, everything changed. The once invincible Quraysh, the most powerful tribe in Arabia, had suffered a devastating and humiliating defeat. Their finest warriors had fallen, their leadership was in disarray, and their aura of invincibility was shattered forever. The battle's immediate aftermath brought practical benefits to the young Muslim community. The ransom collected for Quraysh prisoners significantly boosted their economic situation. The captured weapons and armor strengthened their military capability. But the psychological impact was even more profound. For the first time, the Muslims began to see themselves not as victims but as victors, a people with divine backing and a destiny to fulfill. Within Mecca itself, the defeat triggered a crisis of confidence. Many began to question whether the gods they had been worshipping had truly abandoned them. Some even began to wonder if Muhammad's claims about one God might hold truth after all. The Quraysh leadership, including the powerful Abu Sufyan, realized they could no longer treat the Muslim community as a minor irritation. They were now facing an existential threat. A fascinating detail often overlooked is how the battle affected the poetry and literature of the time. Arab culture placed enormous value on poetic tradition, and before Badr, most famous poets mocked and derided Muhammad and his followers. After the battle, a remarkable shift occurred. Poets began composing verses praising the courage of the Muslims and questioning the wisdom of opposing them. In a culture where poetry shaped public opinion, this represented a massive shift in the cultural landscape. The ripple effects spread far beyond Mecca. Nomadic tribes across Arabia, who had previously hesitated to ally with either side, now began sending delegations to Muhammad. Traditional Arab pragmatism recognized that backing the winning side was always the wisest course. As one tribal leader reportedly remarked, "Muhammad's God fights for him. How can mere men oppose that?" For Muhammad himself, Badr provided validation that transformed his leadership. The victory was viewed as divine confirmation of his prophetic mission. His decisions, both military and religious, now carried the weight of someone who had visibly demonstrated God's favor. When he issued directives, Even previously skeptical followers embraced them with renewed conviction. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Badr's legacy was how it fundamentally altered the balance of power in Arabia. Within just 6 years after this battle, Muhammad would return to Mecca, not as a refugee or an exile, but as a conqueror. And yet, in one of history's most extraordinary moments, he would take the city without bloodshed. The Quraysh, who once had sworn to destroy him and his followers to the last man, surrendered without a fight. Many of the same leaders who had driven Muhammad from his home now embraced Islam themselves. Think about that incredible reversal of fortune. It all began at Badr, with 313 outmatched believers facing impossible odds. The legacy of Badr extends far beyond those immediate years. For subsequent generations of Muslims, the battle became a powerful symbol of faith overcoming adversity, of divine support for the righteous, and of victory against overwhelming odds. Military commanders throughout Islamic history would invoke the spirit of Badr before their own battles. The names of the 313 Badr veterans, known as the Badriyun, became some of the most revered in Islamic tradition. Even today, 14 centuries later, the battle remains a powerful touchstone in Islamic consciousness. The phrase, "like the angels at Badr," has entered common speech in many Muslim societies, referring to timely and unexpected help. Mosques around the world bear the name Badr, and countless children are named after the battle, or its heroes. What began as a desperate confrontation in a remote Arabian valley ultimately sparked a series of events that would create one of the world's greatest civilizations. At its height, the Islamic Empire would stretch from Spain to India, preserving ancient knowledge, advancing science and mathematics, and creating a cultural golden age while Europe was still in its dark ages. All of this, the art, the architecture, the scientific advances, the philosophical discourse, might never have existed had the battle gone differently. Badr wasn't just a turning point in Islamic history, it was a pivotal moment that altered the course of world history. A single day of combat changed everything, proof that history sometimes turns not on the decisions of vast armies and mighty empires, but on the courage and conviction of a few determined souls who refuse to surrender to impossible odds. As our journey through the sands of Badr comes to an end, we're left to contemplate how a single day, one battle lasting only hours, could alter the course of human history so profoundly. The Battle of Badr stands as one of history's most decisive turning points, a watershed moment that forever changed the balance of power, not just in Arabia, but ultimately across 3 continents. For the early Muslims, Badr represented irrefutable proof that divine favor rested upon their cause. The victory against such overwhelming odds could only be explained, in their understanding, as a sign that God himself had intervened in human affairs to support their fledgling community. For military historians studying the battle centuries later, Badr offers a masterclass in how superior strategy, tactical innovation, and unshakable morale can overcome seemingly insurmountable material disadvantages. Muhammad's genius lay not just in his spiritual leadership, but in his practical understanding of battlefield psychology and terrain advantage. Modern military academies still study this battle as a classic example of how a smaller force can defeat a much larger one through superior positioning and exploitation of enemy weaknesses. Yet perhaps most fascinating is how close history came to taking an entirely different path. Had those 313 Muslims been defeated at Badr, as all military logic suggested they should have been, Islam might have been stamped out in its infancy. The religious movement that would eventually stretch from Spain to Indonesia, that would preserve classical knowledge through Europe's dark ages, that would advance mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture, all might never have emerged. Consider this remarkable detail. Among the Quraysh prisoners captured at Badr was Abbas, Muhammad's uncle, who would later become a key figure in early Islamic history. Also captured was Abu al-As, Muhammad's son-in-law, whose later conversion would heal family divisions. Had the battle gone differently, these men might have been among those killing Muhammad's followers, instead of eventually joining them. Such are the razor-thin margins on which history turns. The repercussions of Badr extended far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Without this victory, there would likely have been no Islamic expansion, no golden age of Baghdad, no preservation of Greek philosophical texts that would later help spark the European Renaissance. The magnificent architecture of the Alhambra in Spain, the breathtaking beauty of the Taj Mahal in India, the scholarly achievements of great Muslim thinkers like Ibn Sina and al-Khwarizmi, all can trace their lineage back to that dusty plain where a small band of believers defied the odds. For people of faith, Badr represents the ultimate story of divine support for the righteous against overwhelming adversity. For secular historians, it demonstrates how human courage, innovative thinking, and unwavering conviction can overcome seemingly impossible challenges. And for all of us, regardless of our beliefs, it serves as a powerful reminder that history's greatest moments often come not from the expected quarters, the great empires and mighty armies, but from unlikely sources that the powerful too easily dismiss. As we stand 14 centuries removed from that fateful day in 624 after Christ, we can trace so much of our modern world, from scientific developments to architectural wonders, from philosophical traditions to cultural practices, back to a chain of events that might never have unfolded had those 313 Muslims faced the fate that seemed certain to befall them. The Battle of Badr reminds us that history is not predetermined. It hangs constantly in the balance, shaped by courage, conviction, strategy, and perhaps, depending on your perspective, by forces beyond our understanding. Either way, that single day in the Arabian desert changed our world forever. If you enjoyed this exploration into one of history's most consequential, yet often overlooked battles, please hit the like button, share this video with friends who appreciate history's turning points, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more content that brings the medieval world to life. Your support helps us continue uncovering these fascinating stories from our shared past. Until our next historical adventure, thank you for journeying with us to Badr and back.